So what is a sour wild beer? A sour beer is a beer that traditionally has some sort of sour or tartness in its flavor profile, usually in lactic or acetic acid. This is produced by using yeast and bacteria other than Saccharomyces that produce these compounds during fermentation. A wild beer, which is a little bit different, it's typically just a beer that is fermented with something besides just Saccharomyces. So they're not necessarily going to have sour notes to them, although a lot of them do, and a lot of them have a goaty, horse blankety, just a real Brett characteristic to them. So the cast of characters for sour beers. You have Acetobacter, Brettanomyces, Enterobacter, Lactobacillus, and Pediococcus. We're going to cover each one of those individually here and kind of let you know what role they play in sour beers. So Acetobacter is responsible mostly for producing vinegar. And it does this by oxidizing ethanol to acetic acid. Excessive amounts of acetic acid can really destroy a beer and make it just a vinegar bomb. It's one of the things you got to be careful with when you're working with beers that do have Acetobacter in them. They're a sharp, sour flavor, and it's only palatable at low to moderate levels, which I joked around about too. We are going to have two jars. I have one jar of acetic acid and one jar of lactic acid. We're going to taste a little sample just so you can see the difference between the two acids, and maybe kind of know what kind of sour beers you're going to like, because some sour beers have maybe only lactic in them, no aceto. Some have both, some have no lacto in them at all. So it's definitely something really cool to understand about. They largely contribute the acidic flavor in Flanders red beers. We have a bunch of those here today to check out. They play a smaller role in lambics, and when it comes to Flanders brown, they really shouldn't be evident at all. They require oxygen to convert alcohol to acetic acid, so without oxygen, they can't grow. That's one of the reasons you really want to keep your fermenters covered and make sure there's always water in that airlock, because you can get excessive Acetobacter and plastic buckets as well. But I'll kind of cover that a little bit more later. They are commonly airborne, and they will affect any alcoholic beverage anywhere in the world. They're everywhere, so it's not regional at all. They also are known to produce a viscous, oily, or moldy film, also called a pellicle, on top of the wort. There's also Brettanomyces, and I'm sure you guys have noticed in the corners I'm putting a little picture of what it looks like underneath a microscope. This was discovered by somebody Clausen, a lab director for Carlsberg Brewery, and Carlsberg Brewery actually, there's quite a lot of stuff on yeast that was because of them and because of the studies that they did. So we actually owe a lot of what we know about yeast, not just Brettanomyces, due to them. But they were one of the first guys that discovered it and did a lot of research on them. So he discovered microorganisms that caused a slow secondary fermentation, and this was found in English stock ales. He chose the name Brettanomyces, literally meaning British brewing industry fungus. So this was something they didn't want in their beers. Brett is known to contribute the flavor profiles to lambics, Flanders red ales, and other wild beers. There are 5 recognized species: B. clausini, B. bruxellinus, B. custer-sinus, and you guys can read the other two. I'm not going to try to pronounce those. But there are also many different strains of each species exist. So if you guys start messing with this stuff, you'll see you're going to see more than 5 different varieties out there. But most of them relate back directly to one of the 5 strains. The one of primary importance to wild brewers is the B. bruxellensis. This strain of species produces characteristic porcelain and pie cherry profiles. The other one they use a lot is the B. clausini, which is the one that was found by the guys at Carlsberg, and that attributes a wine-like characteristic to sours. They are also a super attenuating yeast. They will continue to slowly eat sugars, even dextrins that are unfermentable to Saccharomyces. The one exception, as we'll find out a little bit later, is if you use Brettanomyces as a primary fermenter. They do not act the same way. They work best in worts with a lower pH, and then with or without oxygen. Oxygen is actually how you accentuate the acetic acid and the lactic acid. The more oxygen, the stronger that's going to be. The lower the oxygen, the lower it's going to be. As we know, Brett produces lactic and acetic acid, and like I said, it's only with oxygen. Brett is also known to form pellicles that are often thick, white, and lumpy. They're actually pretty gross. If you've never seen one, you look at it, you don't want to drink the beer, but once you taste it, of course, it's pretty enjoyable. This helps aid against oxidation over the long fermentation process, and it protects against unwanted mold and acetobacteria, because if it's sitting on top, it's not allowing any oxygen to permeate through. And you should leave that intact. When it comes to sour beers, the idea is to ferment them, let them sit. You don't want to be moving them around, you don't want to be popping the airlock, you really just need to leave them alone. Enterobacter, this produce flavor compounds traditionally present in young lambic. They ferment glucose into acetic and lactic acid, and they produce byproducts such as dimethyl sulfide. These are a lot of the aromas you get out of sour beers that are kind of unpleasant. It could be vegetal, smoky, moldy, baby diaper, Band-Aid, and they stop production when they get to a pH of 4.3. So one of the things you'll find with a lot of lambic brewers, and when you start doing it at home, you don't have to do the pH stuff, but messing with the pH of things can really help you control what you're doing. We also have lactobacillus, which is a major role in Berliner Weisses. They also play a role in Flanders beers and a minimal one in lambic. They can ferment in the presence and absence of oxygen. They produce lactic acid, which is an acid a little bit less ejectional than acetic, and it's responsible for the pleasant tang found in wild beers. They prefer higher temperatures, usually around body heat level. They cease production at a pH of 3.8, and certain hop acids retard the growth of most lactobacillus, as we'll cover a little bit earlier, which is one of the reasons when it comes to lambics, the hops they use are aged because they don't want to impede the growth of that kind of stuff. Alcohol and lactic acid destroy lactobacillus, so they will produce so much lactic acid that they end up killing themselves out. Pediococcus is the last one we're going to talk about. It is responsible for the bulk of the lactic acid found in lambic, and it shares responsibility with lactobacillus in Flanders beers. They ferment glucose into lactic acid, but unlike lactobacillus, they produce no carbon dioxide. They ferment poorly, if at all, in the presence of oxygen, and they grow very slowly, if at all. They often produce a layer on top of the wort that resembles long elastic threads. It's described as ropey and having a hazy viscosity like oil. If you talk to sour brewers, they'll talk about that. It's also called getting sick to some extent. You'll have a beer that just looks really gross inside. It's stringy, but it will actually, if you give it enough time, it will fall out and it'll go away. And it's definitely, if you have a sour beer that's like that, it's definitely a good indication of it definitely needs more time before you touch it. And of course, their reproduction ceases at a pH of 3.4. So before we get to the beer styles, and this is where we're going to kind of a small interjection in a point, because we're going to talk about each individual one. In the back there, there's two mason jars, one with lactic acid, one with acetic acid.
Yeah, it smells like aspirin.
Keep in mind, once you add malt and everything else with it, it does change it, but it kind of gives you an idea, if you're looking for sours, of what you're going to get out of them.
It's just shooting.
I'm not shooting. Shoot it.
I think everybody got one? Has everybody got one? Yeah, so that's really all this is, guys. This is just white distilled vinegar that I added a little bit of water to, because that's all acetic acid is. It's just vinegar. And it's going to be, as you see, it's really tart, really strong. The lactic should end up being a little more mild, a little more subdued. Drink up.
It's delicious. So good once it hits your lips.
Yeah, it's not. Keep in mind it's a lot stronger than you would have it actually in a beer, but it gives you an idea of that flavor direct. Now we're going to do the lactic acid, which I'll steal your idea. We'll both just pour. They're real similar in flavor, but they're also a little bit different. I think the acetic acid is definitely more pronounced and sharp than the lactic.
had to say.
Alright, so we're going to pick up then with the beer styles. This part, I'm going to basically, I'll do a brief overview of them, and then we're actually going to cover each one. So the BJCP, they currently recognize 5 styles of sour ales. This is a Berliner Weiss, a Flanders Red Ale, a Flanders Brown Ale or Ode Brune, a straight unblended lambic, a goose, and a fruit lambic. Non-BJCP styles include Saison/farmhouse ales, Faro, and American sour / wild ale. So here's where we get to Berliner Weiss, Tom. So if we'll go ahead and everybody wants to get their glass, so these were referred to by Napoleon soldiers as the champagnes of the North. They are sour, wheat-based, effervescent, low-alcohol beer traditionally brewed and drunk in Berlin, Germany. So a sharp, somewhat acidic character is dominant. They can have a moderately fruity character. The fruitiness usually increases with age, and a flowery character may develop. A mild Brettanomyces aroma may be present, but you shouldn't really have any hop aroma, no diacetyl, and no DMS. These are also often served mit Schuss, meaning served with a shot of flavored syrup. This changes both the flavor and the color. Woodruff, raspberry, and lemon are popular syrups for this use. If you guys subscribe to Zymergy, the newest issue actually, there's a guy that tells you how to do that. He gives you the recipes to make all 3 different syrups, so it's something you can try at home. So we'll go ahead and go on to the next one then. A Flanders Red Ale. We have a couple of examples of this. This is actually one of my favorites personally. These are traditional Belgian style, distinguished by a red color and a sharp, sour, and tart flavors, and they use yeast and bacteria. Acetic acid is appropriate for the style, and most undergo long aging in barrels and are blended before served. They have complex fruitiness and complementary malt. The fruitiness is usually high. It's reminiscent of black cherries, oranges, plums, and red currants, and there are oftentimes some vanilla and chocolate notes. So for that one, we have a couple different ones. If somebody wants to grab any of the Flemish, yeah, some guy, he's got one. Flanders Obrewing, or I guess brown ale, is a traditional Belgian sour beer, brewed and blended for long aging. They have strong malt flavors, and they complement lactic and acetic sourness. The sourness should not be as pronounced as in a Flanders Red Ale, the one we just had. And then Brett character is usually absent or understated. So a lot of times with the reds, you will get a little bit of Brett character to them. They're a complex combination of fruity esters and rich malt character. Esters commonly reminiscent of raisins, plums, figs, dates, black cherries, or prunes. A malt character of caramel, toffee, orange, treacle, or chocolate is also common. So we'll go ahead and pour that one around here too with a little bit that we have. Alright, so again, moving right along here. The other one is straight unblended lambic. So this is, it's not blended, there's no fruit in it. This is a traditional Belgian style that is sour and flat, and with almost no hop flavor or aroma. Traditional lambic brewers use open fermentation, allowing the wild yeast and airborne bacteria to inoculate the beer. This is also known as, if somebody can pronounce it better than me, Terroir. There you go. Its characteristic sour barnyard taste of Brettanomyces dominates. It has a decidedly sour acetic aroma that is often dominant in young examples, but maybe more subdued with age as it blends with aromas described as barnyard, earthy, goaty, hay, horsey, and horse blanket. Great descriptors for something you want to drink, right?
Yeah! We have arrived!
Give me some.
Horse and not a horse blanket. I love it.
A mild oak and or citrus aroma is considered favorable. An enteric, smoky, cigar-like, or cheesy aroma is unfavorable. Older versions are commonly fruity with aromas of apples or even honey. No hop aroma, no diacetyl. This is one I think we don't necessarily have a version of. So we'll jump to the next one, guys. The next one is, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher this, Goose. Is that the correct? Okay, Goose. This is produced by blending different vintages of lambic together, traditionally 1, 2, and 3-year-old virgins. They are bottle conditioned and carbonated by the sugar remaining in the younger lambic in the blend. Goose is traditionally finished using the methode champenoise. What they do with this, the beer is carbonated in the bottle through secondary fermentation. The bottle is inverted upside down so that the yeast collects in the neck, and then the neck of the bottle is frozen to create a plug of ice encapsulating the yeast. Then the temporary cap is removed, allowing the existing pressure to force the ice yeast plug out through the neck of the bottle, which is then recorked to preserve the remaining carbonation. So these are moderately sour. They have a moderate sour acidic aroma. This blends with aromas described as barnyard, earthy, goaty, hay, horsey, horse blanket, while some may be more dominant. Sour acidic balance is the key and denotes a better goose. Commonly fruity with aromas of citrus fruits, often grapefruit, apples, or other light fruits, rhubarb, or honey. A very mild oak aroma is considered favorable. An enteric, smoky, cigar-like, or cheesy aroma is unfavorable. Like lambics, no hop aroma and no diacetyl. And this, I believe, as Charles has come around, we do have an example. Fruit lambic, one of my favorites.
Yay!
You got everyone's attention now.
And honestly, if you have a significant other or people you hang out with that don't really care for beer, try a fruit lambic. My wife, I mean, I've been brewing for 14, 15 years. My wife tries everything. She hates all of it. But give her a bottle of framboise she'll sit down and drink that whole thing. She loves that kind of stuff. So it's definitely for people that don't like beer. It's a really good beer to give them to try. So this is a traditional Belgian style. It's usually sour and flat with no hop flavor and no aroma. Same thing, they just like the regular lambic. It's open fermentation, so they let the wild yeast do it. Same characteristic sour barnyard taste of Brettanomyces dominates. And the fruit, which has been added to the beer, should be the dominant aroma. What we have over here, we're going to pour is these are low to moderately sour and acidic characters, so they're not really sour that much. A lot of them tend to be more on the sweet side. And actually, what I found out too, having in the United States as opposed to having it over there is completely different. They back sweeten a lot of the American product, whereas they don't do that so much over there. So what they serve over here, what they bring us over here, is usually a lot sweeter than what you would get over there. So kind of the same thing, the fruit aroma. So it's basically just like the regular lambic, and we'll pour that one. The next one we're talking about is a saison or a farmhouse ale. Now saisons are not always brewed with Brett and bugs though. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So just because you get a saison does not mean it has any bugs at all. It could just have a saison sack yeast and then that's it. So these were traditionally brewed to be consumed throughout the summer months. They're a pretty complex style. They're actually pretty broad, which I think is one of the more broader categories. Many are very fruity in aroma and flavor. They look, you want to look for earthy yeast tones, mild to moderate tartness, lots of spice, and a medium bitterness. They tend to be semi-dry, with many only having a touch of sweetness. A low to moderate sourness or acidity may be present, but should not overwhelm other characteristics. Spice, hop, and sour aromatics typically increase with the strength of the beer. The alcohols are soft, spicy, and low in intensity, and should not be hot or solventy. The malt character is light, and there is usually no diacetyl. And this is another one. We have a couple different examples. I think we'll just pick one of them. Barrow, which luckily Charles was good enough to bring some. This is made by blending lambic, usually low gravity unblended lambic or a blend of lambic and Mars with burnt sugar or candy sugar to form a sweet and sour beverage. Traditionally, the sugar was added directly to the mug and served with a mortar with which the drinker would crush it into the beer. Therefore, the sweet beer remained uncarbonated as with an unblended lambic. So we'll go ahead and do that one.
Yeah.
The next one is American Sour / Wild Ale. This style refers to a wide range of beers brewed using wild yeast and/or bacteria. The flavors can range from a slight sour tang to a complex Brettanomyces barnyard flavor, often with a wood-aged character as well. American sour ales range from golden to deep copper to brown in color. These beers may or may not be fruit flavored. Horsey, goaty, leathery, and phenolic characters evolve from the Brettanomyces organisms, and acidity may be present, but should be balanced with other flavors. Residual flavors that come from liquids previously aged in barrels, such as bourbon or sherry, should not be present. Wood vessels may be used during the fermentation or aging process, but wood-derived flavors such as vanillin should not be present. In darker versions, roasted malt, caramel-like, and chocolate-like characters should be subtle in both flavor and aroma. We're actually getting into the homebrewing part of it, some recommendations, maybe some best practices, maybe some stuff that you guys can go home and feel a little inspired maybe to start up doing one of these, because they are a lot of fun. A lot of fun to do.
Okay.
All right, so now we'll get into the brewing part at home. This is always one of those things to me. I mean, my probably biggest inspiration for doing this is, I think it's one of the things you look at all the information out there and it seems so overwhelming. It's really not. You do need a couple more. You do need a little bit more equipment than you would normally. You usually need a place to store them, but they can definitely be done at home with a lot of success. A lot of people, and it's been getting really more popular, especially the last couple of years. So equipment needed. All equipment that touches the wort after yeast is pitched should be separated from your regular brewing equipment to prevent cross-contamination. This includes fermenters, transfer tubing, airlocks, bottling equipment, hydrometers, kegs, anything that touches the beer after you add the wild yeast and bugs. Of course, before that, you're fine. You need a place to store it while it ferments, preferably in a temperature-controlled environment, and patience. I can't express enough patience with these beers. You need to put them in a dark corner and just forget about them, and look at them in 9 months to a year. Other than that, because you're going to pull that airlock, you're going to introduce acetobacter, you're going to get vinegar, it's not going to go where you want it to go. So really just patience and just leave it alone, don't touch it. Biggest question I had, and what I did a lot of research on, was fermenters. because there's a lot of stuff out there. Better bottles from my studies there are generally considered the best vessels. They're cheaper than glass. They allow a little bit of oxygen over time, which can help with certain styles. The downside though is they flex. So I talk about not wanting to move them, not wanting to disturb the pellicle. They're a bit of a bummer for that, because just scooting the thing over, I just had this happen. I put a new shelf in, I scoot the thing over, I watched my whole entire pellicle break up. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but the idea is to basically leave them there. Plastic buckets are not recommended. I'm sorry, glass cutleries will work just fine. They don't allow any oxygen, but that can also be a bad thing for certain styles. For some styles, you do want a little bit of oxygen in there, and that doesn't allow any. Plastic buckets for primary fermentation are fine. Secondary and letting them age, no. They add way too much oxygen. You're going to end up, in most cases, with a really acidic, vinegary beer. It just encourages too much growth of the acid-producing bacteria. Barrels can also be used, but homebrew size barrels should be used a few times with other beers, first off, to leach out any of the wood flavor. As you saw by the style guidelines, typically, even though they're in barrels, they don't have the oaky, vanillins. You don't really want that character to them. They should also not be stored in barrels for the entire length of fermentation, as too much oxygen can permeate through the wood. What I've heard a lot of recommendations is they'll do, maybe 9 months in a better bottle or in a glass carboy, and they might finish it off the last 3 months in a barrel. But you're going to find that's one thing that's really hard to nail down, because not a lot of people have really done it with barrels. And we even asked some questions. I think me and Larry were asking Lauren Salazar, or I don't know if it was you or somebody else, about that too. And for us, you got to be careful because of the surface to air ratio using those. But again, you can do it. You just don't want to do it the whole time. So hops and bittering rates. Sour and wild beers usually range from 1 to 40 IBUs, with most being under 25. Traditionally, aged hops are used. What they really want out of it isn't the alpha acid at all. It's the preservative and the antibacterial properties from beta acids and polyphenols. Because the alpha acids, I said earlier, they can retard the growth of bacteria such as lactobacillus and pediococcus. So a good substitute, everybody always asks, well, hey, I don't have aged hops at home. A good substitute is a low alpha, low cohumulin hops, and they can be used as a reasonable substitute. What I've had a lot of good luck off of a couple online places. Hop Shack, I think, has had them. I bought some German Select Spout hops. They were 2% alpha acid. Really cheap, so they're low cohumulin, so it was really a great hop without having to age. If you want to age your own, the recommendation is basically rip that package open, crush it up a little bit, put it in just a Ziploc bag, throw it on top of the freezer, fridge or whatever, and just let it sit there at room temperature for 6, 7, 8 months, just to let them age. But again, you definitely don't have to do that. Just pick something with low alpha acid, and make sure you use a brewing program or something like that that's going to give you what your IBUs are going to be. What I have found with my playing around with it is when you get to the higher IBU ranges, you get a real orange pithy taste in your sours. It's not really pleasant, in my opinion, and I think it's that's why they don't do it that way. So some grain and some mash considerations. Consider adding a portion of wheat or oats to your brew. This is going to help improve the mouthfeel, particularly because sours, they ferment out so low, they can be very thin and very dry. So you want to use something in there that's going to leave some mouthfeel to it so it's not too thin. Ultimately, if you're brewing a wild or sour beer that is supposed to be dry, you can use cane or corn sugar, since they will completely ferment out. Also, I've seen a lot of studies where they'll suggest using acidulated malt in styles with a lower pH, but you got to be careful with that because you don't want it too low. Best recommendations I've seen is about, for a 5-gallon batch, about 8 ounces of acidulated malt. Consider using a portion of crystal malts. These are going to leave some residual sugars. They're longer sugars, so they don't ferment out as easily. And you also want to mash at a higher temperature to increase the production of more complex, longer chain sugars. A good starting point is a mash temp of 156. This is going to leave more sugars for the yeast and bacteria to eat, ensuring that the Saccharomyces don't get to eat all the sugars before the bugs get a chance to go to work. You can also do a turbid mash, but I'm not going to cover that there. Yeast, of course, you want to choose a yeast or bacteria that is appropriate for the style you are trying to brew. So if you want something that has lactic and acetic, pick something that's going to give you that. If it doesn't have both of those, pick something that's not going to give you those. Some homebrewers pitch with regular yeast in primary and then add the bugs in secondary. A lot of stuff I've read and a lot of people I've spoke to, they say if you really want to get that to pop out, do it as totally primary. You're gonna usually be much happier with the results. They don't recommend using sour blends. It's one of the few things because like the Yeast Rose Layer blend and the WLP sour mix, when they put those together, they put certain percentages of these together. So the problem with fermenting a batch of beer is that becomes out of whack and you're not going to get the exact thing that they wanted you to have. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it though, because I know so many people, Larry I think in particular, you've done lots of pitching on type of yeast cakes, and Rob too. And pretty happy with the results overall?
Yeah, and I add dregs from other breweries. I mean, I use Roselaire, but I throw so much other stuff in there that the blend is...
Yeah, so he brings up the bottle dregs, which is the next part. A really good way to do sours is the bottle dregs from commercial beers. And you'll see me, I actually brought a couple of, as nerdy as I am, a couple of jars with lids on them. I've sanitized them, so a lot of the sours we have here, I'm gonna go ahead and decant that off and take that home and store those. And it's a really good way to increase the sourness in your beers. And a lot of people have a lot of really good luck with it. MattFermentationist.com, if you're looking for a list, he has a great list there. He'll tell you which ones just have Brett, which ones have Brett and bugs. So it's a pretty good sized list, so it gives you a good way to get stuff out. Fermentation and aging. As I said, fermenting wort should be kept in a dark, temperature-controlled environment, typically at ale temperatures. Carbohydrate movement and opening should be minimized to encourage the growth of the pellicle, if it has one, and to keep oxygen supply limited. Too much oxygen and the beer becomes more vinegar-like in nature. I talk about the whole pulling the thing off, take samples. Don't do it. The other thing, check your airlocks frequently throughout the long fermentation maturation cycle. I mean, I check my airlocks probably every month and a half, and they will definitely go down on you. I've heard of a couple people doing home brews that they forgot about it for months. When they look, there's no water in there, and they have a nice acetobacter pellicle on top, and they end up with a vinegar bomb. The other thing is, if you're going to bottle, make sure the beer is finished fermenting before bottling. This is especially important because the organisms can take a long time to ferment all the sugars out. And you're actually going to end up with a lot different beer from when you first bottle it. All that stuff, it's still going to eat what's there, so it can be a very different beer a year later. Most recommendations I saw online say to wait till you reach a final gravity of between 1.008 and 1.006, but not all beers are going to ferment that low depending on if you have what type of stuff you have in there. Again, patience is the key. Give the beer time to develop before you start disturbing it. Most sour/wild beers take at least 9 months to develop. Many take a year or more. One of the exceptions being like the Berliner Weisses. I believe those are a regular fermentation schedule for the most part. Blending. Many producers of sour and wild beers blend their product. A lot of the Rodenbach and things like that, that's all blended. The biggest thing is consistency between batches, and they want to sometimes accentuate certain characteristics. So I suggest everybody, if you guys get into this, mess around with blending of stuff. Larry had a great, his pumpkin beer he poured when he was around here. He did a sour mash on something. I guess it was too acidic for you, and you basically blended that into some other beers, and it was really a nice beer. So I talked about pellicles. Here are some pictures of how nasty and disgusting these things look. Very odd looking. Like I said, unless you had tasted the beer, you'd look at a beer like that and probably be like, no. I mean, they are pretty gross looking. Couldn't really find any pictures of the ropey look that they can get. A lot of this is Brett pellicles, but it gives you an idea. I mean, it's not going to look, don't be scared if it looks moldy and just absolutely disgusting. Your only real concerns, honestly, are getting a green mold on top. That's definitely going to be bad. But for the most part, this gives you guys kind of an idea of what they look like. And so I talked a little bit about pure Brettanomyces fermentation. This is actually something that's been kind of a recent thing in the craft brewing industry. Particularly, I mentioned Crooked Stav being one of the people that have really pushed this. There's not a lot of research that exists as using Brettanomyces as a primary fermenter. Chad Jacobson, the guy of Crooked Stav, he did his master's dissertation on this. It's called the Brettanomyces Project. If you're a beer geek like myself and really want to geek out, it's a long thing, but he does a lot of really cool studies that nobody else has done with Brettanomyces. And you taste a lot of his beers, they're not really funky. It's really amazing how different of a flavor you can get as a primary fermenter and how much it acts almost exactly like Saccharomyces. So brewing 100% Brettanomyces beer, we actually did 6 beers in the CBM Club. I actually have these at the December meeting, if you guys remember. So we did 6 beers with WLP 644. This is Brettanomyces bruxellensis Troy. And here's kind of what we found on our research and our own experience through it. So a lot of studies suggest using lager-like pitch rates. So and here's what I found out a little bit about this. Has anyone ever wondered maybe why lagers like that, why you pitch more? It turns out the cells are about half the size of Saccharomyces cells. And that's one of the reasons behind pitching more, because if the cells are smaller, you need more cells to do the same job. Brettanomyces is pretty much the same thing. So they suggest using lager-like pitch rates. They grow slower. Recommendations are making a starter 5 to 7 days before you brew with them. They can seem to stall. 5 of the 6 of us all had issues with our beers where we thought, oh no, this is going to be a malt bomb. It just literally seemed to stop fermenting. And mine was like a week and a half where it just didn't move. And Larry had a similar, everybody had the same problem except for the guy Kyle in our group, but he pitched on top of a yeast cake from a beer he already did before. So he had a huge pitch rate. His chewed right through, ours all took, and all seemed to, they seem to eat, take a nap before they decide to finish the job. The fermentations are a little longer than ale fermentations, but they can be complete in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. A lot of times Brettanomyces don't flock particularly well though. They will leave kind of a haze. It does take some time to get that out of them. So there's my sources. We will post this on the website. We'll have the video here too, of course. And I do have the box that he's sitting underneath. The 5 beers that we did. No, it was 6 because you brought the one I didn't have.
Exactly.
We do have all 6 versions. It's really kind of interesting too. Now that they've aged, they're all about, 4 months old, so give or take, right around there. So we'll have those to sample as well. At this point, I thank everybody for showing up. We're done with the presentation part. So I think there's brats and hot dogs, I think. There's food back there, so guys, enjoy.